Let me warmly welcome our first speaker, Professor David Kennedy. I'd like to hear your take on global governance. What are the challenges on global coordination because of COVID-19? Please, Professor.
It's a global phenomenon, but how people were affected, who could do something about it, who couldn't, were extremely local. And sometimes calling something a global problem or asking for global governance is a way of not doing anything about it. Nevertheless, we routinely begin thinking about pandemic governance by focusing on multilateral institutions, the WTO foremost, and other parts of the UN system, and asking, well, how well did they perform and how could they be improved to next time? Both very important issues. But I think the pandemic has also demonstrated that if the globe is governed, it's not by those visible institutions. Although the UN family looks like the ministries of a national government, health, transport, cultural affairs, labor, and so on, these institutions were not designed to govern in the sense we normally think about government, but rather as weak forums for information sharing and coordination when governments have information, are willing to share it, and want to coordinate. And we might add standard setting when governments want to set standards and can agree on how to do it.
Let me move to the second panelist, Dr. Amban Ren. He has insight in terms of how China has been using their approach in terms of tackling with the COVID-19 pandemic, and what could we learn from China approach? Dr. Am, please.
Often we think about global governance as one uniform governance. But as Professor David Kennedy mentioned, that there's multiple modes of governance, and that's how we should rethink governance. In this section, I want to stress on the current geopolitical event that reflect on the division of governance between the two sides, the Western side and the Chinese side. Now just a little bit of the context to give you a sense of what we are facing right now. This is a once in a century global pandemic. We have seen last time that something like this happened was 100 years ago with the Spain influenza pandemic. However, it's happening amidst rising nationalism and anti-globalization sentiment. Before the pandemic, we have seen increasing trade wars between nations. We have seen anti-globalization sentiments and nationalistic sentiments across the globe. And with the coronavirus, I remember that I was in a meeting in China once, and there's one audience who asked the speaker, a prominent economist in a forum, when will the trade war between the US and China stop? And I remember that the speaker said that it will stop when we face a common threat for humankind. For example, global climate change, or even a very bad natural disaster. And then, 1 year after that, the coronavirus came. And a lot of people might say that this is a common threat for humankind, and that it's time for the US and China to come together. It's time to rethink globalization and to reclaim global efforts to coordinate, to solve global problems. But what we see is that we see even a stronger division between the two camps, even more nationalistic sentiments among nations, even more inward-looking governance within each country.
Our next speaker, Dr. Paul Pizzit, and I'd like to hear your view on economic perspective in how the world has been coping with challenges on COVID-19.
The world has recovered from last year. The world economy has recovered from last year, because last year there was a big drop in the world economic growth by 3.5%. And this year, the growth will rebound from that very low point by 5.6%. And this is the latest World Bank forecast that just came out a day or two ago. And you can see that, the countries that are really leading this growth this year are actually not the developing countries, but it's the US, it's Europe, it's China. And to be honest, it's US and China that is actually leading most of the growth this year. Because if you look at these numbers carefully, you will see that, for example, last year, the US economy contracted by 3.5%. But this year it's forecasted to grow by 6.8, which means that it's going to be back and even at a higher level than its pre-COVID economic level. Same with China. China never contracted, so it's still growing. So for these two countries this year, they will be at an economic level that is even higher than their pre-COVID levels.